it's a pretty complex puzzle. But I did want to say that all healing is not just lodged either in, for example, various organs. It's also lodged in, for example, the mind and the information field that is around the body.
Yeah, exactly. I just say consciousness, and if I had time, we could explain how this is empirically verifiable. Consciousness is simply something that extends way, way out. And I've actually discussed how it may go to the ends of the universe. That I can't empirically verify, but you can do experiments. There's a lot of Russians in the 60s and 50s and 70s that did. And then I think it's Broad is that the scientist name who wrote that book, Mind Reach, I think it's called. And you can do experiments which very clearly, if you hook someone up, for example, with sensors on their skin, which measure their electrical conductivity of their skin, which is a measure of someone's emotional intensity. Okay, so if you put someone in the next room and they try to will that person, not in a disciplined way, just don't give them any technique, just tell them to try to get the other, try to transfer your thought, your consciousness into them, and try to increase their levels of consciousness or their levels of emotion in various ways, you can get that to happen on a level that's far above chance. Now, if I'm explaining this carefully enough so everybody can understand, this is one of the biggest discoveries in history, that our consciousnesses are interlinked and they can affect things far outside of our bodies. That's just one of many experiments that you can bring up. And we have to understand how unbelievable this is and how misled we've been by our university systems, unfortunately, for hiding all this stuff. And they basically turned their backs on all this parapsychological, paranormal research decades ago, before the 1920s. And, this is we don't need to sit here and be bashful and saying that consciousness is everywhere. And we can do intention experiments to change reality as much as we want to. Because our consciousness, which is charged by meditation and focus, is much more powerful than the cumulative mass consciousness of all the mind-controlled slaves out there in the world.
Yes, absolutely. And just one more sort of note on that, and then Dr. Waterman, I'd love to hear you respond as well, because I know when you're talking about affecting the quantum with healing, you're talking about the same thing. But I do want to say that, again, even if someone is in the next room and they are deciding to affect your reality or your consciousness, you have a choice there. You can either accept the incoming sort of probe, or you can actually send it away in a peaceful way. You can do otherwise as well. There is, in other words, it works both ways. It's not a one-way path.
Is that my cue?
That was your cue, Dr. Waterman.
Oh, okay, Jeff. Thank you. One of the things that I'll just share some experiences. It has to do with this thing called intent. And one question too I'd like to ask Jeff after I'm a bit here is, how does the sovereign nature of man fit into his understanding of the research and work he's been doing? I think that's important, and I think that's what you're saying, Kerry, is, either we're sovereign and independent or we're not, but I have problems with the fact that, I've yet to see complete, absolute sovereignty over our physicality. And a lot of people, I mentioned this before, and somebody said, I gave an example of, some people have to use glasses, how come they still have to use them? And this one person said, that's interesting you bring it up, because you can go to this guy's place and you get some training and voila, you don't need glasses anymore. That's not how I define sovereignty. And particularly sovereign will. Sovereign will, in my definition, is that the minute I want it in my will, it manifests. So that the minute I say, hey, I'd love to be without glasses, let's do it, it happens. I don't have to exercise. I don't have to run around the block. I don't have to do somersaults. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. But back to this thing about this other room, I've experienced the fact that using quantum healing, and a lot of times we do hear about the things called, I'm sure he's maybe pretty familiar then with the book called Sanctuary, where there's healing aspects through a broadcasting of the intent over a long distance. Whenever there there are two aspects to it. There's the physical aspect to it, and then there's the physical aspect. The physical aspect being that how we affect frequencies and intents. Actually, by the way, intents can be measured. They actually create a physical wave in the universe that goes on and on and on. And how that gets oftentimes when I'm healing people or helping people get well is that the closer to the remedy one seems to make a great deal of difference on how effective it is. Now, that's been my experience. And I think the reason is when you get into frequencies, which are generally what our mind creates when we have a thought, it generates a thought, and you have to ask, where did that thought come from? And when I'm in anatomy, I ask, well, where did that thought come from? And we get into something called infinite regression. And when each thought then is a result of a former thought, we go back eventually to an original thought. And those thoughts are conveyed on a physical plane, but also on a non-physical plane. And both of those are not, they don't behave in the same way. So on a physical way, healing has to have proximity to it. When you're dealing in a physical way to heal somebody. When you're working in a quantum way to heal somebody, a physical location and proximity is not important. And so if you're in a healing modality that is very physical, then you need to have proximity. So, for example, a remedy on a shelf in a health food store has a proximity of being a few miles away or down the block or around the corner. It's not doing us any good. However, there's a non-physical energy, and I think everybody has experienced this feeling. They walk in a health food store, and ignoring the fact that all of them go, most people go, oh, this is all good for me. I don't know what to get. What they're feeling, like Jeff is saying in a non-physical way, what they're feeling is the energetic, non-physical impact, and it's yet proximal to their location. In other words, the closer they are to that health food store, the more impact they have on their goodwill. I know that a lot of people also feel this in bookstores. They'll go to a bookstore and they just sit there and feel a difference than where they are in another location. Health food stores, bookstores, and other locations are like that. And so I kind of try and break it down so that if I'm doing physical work, I make sure that I'm close, so that if I'm doing like I was talking about earlier, where I was sending frequencies which are physical into the horse, that we literally connect the horse up to the remedy, which means that we shave the hair, or we put the person in a harness, or physically attach a device with a wire to it and send the frequency directly through the body. If we're not working on a physical plane, then that's not necessary. So that's what I've found in a clinic setting. I don't know if that fits with what Jeff has found out, but then again, it always seems like you can do a lot of physical things, and like we were mentioning before, it depends on if there is something that their sovereign will is impacting the final result. So what is more powerful? Well, it's not physical. And so I'd kind of like to have his thoughts too on what, man's sovereignty and his sovereign will has in relation to some of the things he's found out. I'd be real interested in hearing that.
Yeah, I'm right on the same page as you. As far as all the little changes and feelings and whatnot that people have, those are all going on within us. If I go to, there's a forest near my house that I go walking through with my daughters quite frequently, and I'll just notice, because I'm paying attention to my inner world, I'll notice I feel so much different when I get there. And then I can just watch the feelings change as I drive back into where the neighborhood is, where my house is. And it's just a totally different, and I hate to tell you this, but it's just more of an unhappy feeling. And it's almost as if I can't control it in certain ways. It's